Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast, a preview episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got with me Mike Rodak from Bama 247, getting ready for a huge game on Saturday night. Number 5, Georgia, number 17, Alabama, 7:30 Eastern Time, 6:30 Central Time, will be televised on ABC. Mike's coming on, and we are going to discuss the Alabama Crimson Tide, really break down Alabama, learn more about this roster, and as we get further into this episode, we'll look at this matchup. We'll share what stands out to us, what we're watching for, and how we think this thing's going to play out. So, first off, Mike, I appreciate you popping on this Thursday afternoon, and hope game week, especially before a big top 20 matchup, has treated you well.
Yeah, always nice having the bye week before these Alabama Georgia games too. So a little extra time to rest and get ready to go to Athens this weekend.
Mike, I want to start off and go back to week one. I know a lot of college football fans were paying attention to that Alabama Florida State game. I think a lot of people kind of rushed to judgment on this Alabama team based on that 31-17 loss. But in the week since then, what do you think of the response Alabama has had and the way they bounced back after a really tough start of the season?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of fans that were frustrated watching that game about effort. That was kind of the big story coming out of it. There's a lot of clips that got posted on social media of players that weren't giving full effort and or just being out physical, whatever the case may be, and a lot of people saying this isn't what they're used to seeing from an Alabama team that obviously historically within the past couple decades will kind of hit you in the mouth and they'll play hard and as Nick Saban would say, they'll make your ass quit. Like that's what people are used to around here. So this was different. What they saw against Florida State was very different, and it's. I think it's part of the story. I don't know if it's all the story, but there were some pretty big name players that used to play here. Greg McElroy's on the radio in Birmingham. AJ McCarron, Trent Richardson that had some pretty strong thoughts on what they saw from players in that game. Loafing, was kind of the popular word. So it all kind of got to the players. I think it's one of those where it's impossible not to hear that, and I think it kind of lit a fire under them that maybe wasn't there going into week one, and I think the coaching staff as well, realized that they needed to bear down a little bit more on these players, and this was an off season where they talked a lot about wanting to be a player-led team and the players holding themselves more accountable than what was the case last year and it just didn't really manifest itself in week one. So I think the coaches realized, well, if the players aren't going to police themselves, then we need to be a little bit harder on them. And I do think that's been the case the last couple of weeks. There's been a different tone, a different energy from Kalen DeBoer, who is a very steady, very nice, very mild mannered guy. But I think he's tried to ratchet up some of the heat on his players and make sure that they're doing everything that they need to do and his assistants too, who I think, Ryan Grubb, the offensive coordinator, and the defensive coordinator, Kane Womack, are a little bit more naturally inclined to be the harder coaching guys. But I think even in this case, like they've certainly bared down on players. So I think the players have gotten the message. That's the bottom line, is that they went out against ULM, and you could tell from the first few snaps, like they're going to play through the whistle, they're going to hit people, they're going to play hard. All the things that they got accused of not doing against Florida State, they tried to correct and make the case against ULM, which it's ULM. So it was a little bit helpful to have that level of opponent coming into week two. And then Wisconsin, I think it was a continuation of that. It was the story coming into that game was let's keep it going, let's keep the momentum going, and I think we all realize now, especially like Wisconsin's not a great team this year. Obviously, Luke Fickell's under a lot of fire there, and they were just overmatched by Alabama. Whether Alabama played hard or not, and they did play hard, I think Alabama would have been fine because of the talent level differential there. So that's kind of been the story of the last couple weeks, and obviously there's been a bye week here, and it's just been about keeping the pedal to the metal, keeping the foot on the gas, like all of these phrases that they like to use, being intentional, as Kalen DeBoer likes to say, and knowing that now you need to go back on the road. It's going to be a much higher quality opponent, and you need to keep doing all the things that you've done the last couple of weeks and you got accused of not doing in week one.
I want to kind of go position by position on this Alabama team, and it feels pretty fitting to start at quarterback with Ty Simpson and how he's played the last few games. Kirby Smart said he's probably the hottest quarterback in college football right now with how he has been playing. What stands out to you about what Ty has done through 3 games? What are his strengths, in your opinion, and what areas does he still need to work on?
Yeah, I think it was always a quarterback battle through the spring and the summer. Um, but I think they were still trying to get more out of Ty. That it wasn't as if he just went out and completely wowed everybody in the spring and summer to the point where it's like there's no chance of anybody else playing a quarterback. And I think that carried over a little bit into week one where they still wanted to see something from Ty Simpson. That was his first start against Florida State after 3 years of being on the bench. And it wasn't the game wasn't his fault by any means. And again, like guys like McElroy and McCarron are kind of coming out and defending him. There was a few drops. Ryan Williams had a few drops in that game. The pass protection was not great. It wasn't. They didn't lose because of Ty Simpson, but it wasn't also a game where Ty came out and just completely solidified himself as the starter of the entire season. I did not get that sense, and you saw some of what made him a 5-star recruit, maybe a first round pick one day. But the accuracy, kind of the mental part of the game seemed to be coming to him pretty well. He's a guy that wants to take off a little bit. I think he certainly was used to doing that in high school in Tennessee at a lower level of football. Was able to probably escape a lot of players in high school. I think he's starting to realize that you have to be more selective about that. Against Florida State, there were some times where he ran backwards, he got outside the pocket, he just got run down. There was really no chance of getting a first down with his legs. It's that feel that I think he still needs to work on of, A, when do I get outside the pocket instead of staying in the pocket and getting rid of the football? And B, if I am outside the pocket, do I run or do I throw the ball? And there were some decisions in that game that were questionable. He had one where he probably could have run for a first down. I think it was a fourth down play, and he threw to Ryan Williams, and just it was a bad throw. He one hopped it. So just kind of that feel of when to do what wasn't really there. And at the end of the day, like I think expectations were high for Kalen DeBoer of Ty Simpson. He's not a freshman. He's not a sophomore. He's a fourth-year player. And I think Kalen wanted to see more out of Ty in that game than what he got. And that's Kalen DeBoer's offense. It's very pass heavy. It's all about the quarterback. It's all about the receivers. That's what made Kalen DeBoer great at Washington, was what he had with Michael Penix and Rome Odunze and those guys. So he needs a quarterback to play well. And, he said to Ty, like, I'm going to put Austin Mack, your backup, into the game in the second quarter against ULM. And it's going to be a competitive situation. So that, I think, lit a little bit of a fire under Ty as well. And you saw Ty come out and just bang, 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 bang. I think it was the first 12 or 13 passes he completed in that game. And really, ever since then, you include the Wisconsin game, like he's been lights out. So I don't know if that completely shuts down any talk of would Alabama make a quarterback change at some point this season. I don't think it would happen in this game if Ty struggled, but it's still something in the back of the mind of Kalen DeBoer. I think it has to be, given what you have behind Ty. So it's still a situation where he has a lot to prove. This is his first SEC start. Obviously, he just lost on the road, so he's going to have to play better on the road. But guys have to play better around him, too. And that's probably starts with Ryan Williams based on what we saw in week one. It also starts with Caden Proctor on the offensive line. I think needs to play a lot better at left tackle.
Well, let's jump to wide receiver and let's talk about Ryan Williams and really this entire crew, because this is a group that very talented. Obviously, the attention is going to be paid to Ryan Williams. But when we talked to Kirby Smart on Monday, he just raved about Jeremy Bernard and said he was, a key part of this offense. What have you seen from this receiver core? Ryan Williams has been banged up a little bit early in the season. What do you think of this group as a whole and the challenge they're going to present to Georgia?
This is the absolute strength of Alabama's team, is the receiver group. And this is the group that I think they need to play well to win the game, and win a lot of games this year for that matter. So, again, that's kind of how this offense is designed. They want to throw the ball down the field. They want to stretch teams vertically. They want to win with their receivers and their quarterback's arms. So, we saw that last year in the Georgia game. That's what they were able to do with Ryan. And that was obviously the game where everybody was watching that, ratings were through the roof, and everybody got really excited and really, Ryan Williams became a celebrity because of that game. But people didn't really realize that the rest of that season, he never really matched what he did in that game, and it really tapered off towards the end. Especially, the bowl game against Michigan was there's really nothing there, and that wasn't going up against Will Johnson of Michigan. He opted out of that game, so there's a lot of questions going into this year about Ryan Williams, despite what we all saw in the Georgia game last year. And then you had the Florida State game where there was multiple drops. I think there's 3 total that we tracked, and looked like he just wasn't very strong going across the middle. Hesitant is probably a correct word, and there was critics again. AJ McCarron was one that came out and really was pretty strong on Ryan Williams, and also got a concussion in that game. So then he missed the ULM game, came back against Wisconsin, and everybody's like, well, what version of Ryan Williams are we going to get? And he goes off for 165 yards again, just like he did against Georgia last year, and had a touchdown play that was pretty impressive as well. So, they need a lot more of that from Ryan Williams and a lot less of the drops and kind of the alligator arms across the middle of the field. They've played him more in the slot this year, which has been a point of contention among fans, if he's better suited to be outside and stretching the field that way. But Bernard has been, from the middle of last season until now, really their number one receiver. He's they call him a dog. He's a very kind of just keeps his mouth shut and goes out there and plays football. And not to say that Ryan doesn't, but like Jeremy Bernard's been very under the radar compared to the celebrity of Ryan, and his production has been better, for the last 8 or 10 games on the whole. So, Emeka Ibuka, I think, was a comparison I saw from one of the NFL draft experts, within the last couple weeks, and he could be right up there as a first-round pick in this draft, because Bernard's a senior. So it's the combination of those two guys. But then Alabama went out in the portal this past offseason. They got Isaiah Horton from Miami to kind of give him that third option and really stress teams. So Horton's 6'4", more of a red zone target. It's been a little bit quiet, these first 3 games. He was hurt, the Florida State game. But if Kirby says, I'm not going to let Ryan Williams beat me again, like what happened last year, and if he says, I'm not going to let Jeremy Bernard beat me either, then it's going to open up opportunities for a guy like Horton, who I think is better than what Alabama had out of their third receiver last year. And then also the freshman, Lazio Brooks, who's a 3-star kid out of New Jersey, who from the time he stepped foot on campus in the spring has really impressed people. Smaller, but also very shifty, very quick, very fast. Whereas number 17 has a little bit of the Jalen Waddle look to him as a player, and also a guy who had a drop against Wisconsin. So that's something that they need to clean up, but kind of has that explosive ability. And I can see him getting some opportunities in this game if they feel like Georgia is giving a lot of attention to Ryan Williams to try to get the ball in Lazio Brooks' hands. So it's really those 4 guys. And again, I think that's the strength of this Alabama team is how deep and how athletic and how talented they are at wide receiver.
It's going to be a matchup to watch on Saturday, especially coming off of the way that Georgia played against Tennessee and the secondary having issues, giving up those explosive plays. Mike, I want to ask you about the ground game. One, how big you feel like getting Jam Miller back would be. Based on what I had seen earlier in the week, it sounds like he's trending in the right direction. And your thoughts on what the run game has looked at like without Jam, some of those other guys who have been in the mix.
Yeah, I mean, Jam's going to be helpful to Alabama, but I don't think he's going to be kind of the magic wand fix. And it's been a rough go for the ground game for Alabama the first 3 games. And it was last year. I think if you look at the rushing totals for Alabama last year, they were good, but a lot of that was Jalen Milroe. He was their leading rusher last year. The traditional running game with the backs last year was not great, and that includes Jam Miller. So there was a lot to prove for this group going into the year, and then Jam gets hurt during fall camp with the collarbone, dislocated collarbone. So he's good to go for this game. He's not on the injury report. I think there's still going to be a feeling out process of taking some hits on that collarbone in this game and seeing how he feels. I don't think it's going to be a full workload for him, but I think they most will need him as a pass protector. They really trust him in blitz pickup. They trust him in that sort of role as a senior. So third downs, I think you're going to see a lot of Jam Miller. If they're trying to run the ball in early downs, I think you kind of see what you have out of Jam. But Kevin Riley has been a player that has really stood out kind of out of nowhere. These first couple games with the injury, he started fall camp fifth on their depth chart at running back. He's a second-year kid out of Tuscaloosa, a three-star prospect, and they put him out there against Florida State. It's like, man, this kid's got some pop to him, and that's been the case these last three games. So he's been the bright spot for Alabama. I think he's going to continue to get opportunities in this game, but that group as a whole, their running game is nowhere near where it needs to be. And again, I think that's something that frustrates people that have watched Alabama historically, because that's been kind of the bread and butter of what they like to do. And this past game against Wisconsin, they had 72 rushing yards. They scored 38 points. And I think that's actually the first time it's happened in Alabama history where they've scored 38 points with that few rushing yards. So there's some good and bad, but that you're not getting the quarterback run game that you got last year, or even the last 2 years. If you go back to the SEC championship with Milroe 2 years ago, again, Ty's going to want to run. They don't want Ty to run a whole lot. They want him to be throwing the ball. So your rushing yards are going to come from your backs. And I do think there will be some from Jam, but the offensive line needs to be better. They're rotating guys at right guard and right tackle, still trying to find the best two. And this team right now, it's probably their biggest weakness that they have going into this game.
It helps to unmute when I start talking. I think for a lot of people, when they've looked at Alabama this year, the takeaways have come from the Florida State game. And a lot of that game felt so pass heavy from Alabama. But I wanted to ask you, Mike, do you think a lot of that was a result of, look, we're down, we have to throw? Do you think we could see more of a balanced attack in this game on Saturday night?
I think they're going to try it to some extent. I do think they probably got away from the run a little bit early against Florida State. Again, I think just in terms of the identity and what this offensive staff has done historically, they want to throw the ball. Like, that's what they do. Kalen DeBoer did it with Ryan Grubb, the offensive coordinator at Washington. Their wide receivers coach, DeMarcus Shepard, comes from an air raid background at Western Kentucky and Purdue in some places. Brian Ellis, their tight ends coach, was at Georgia Southern before, running the air raid. Like, this is an air raid style coaching staff. That's their bread and butter, and I think that's where their personnel really points to as well, because of what I mentioned at wide receiver. And to me, it's still a matter of, can Ty Simpson do it? I think Ty's got some talent, but you got to see it on the road. You got to see it against an SEC defense. You got to see him handle these situations where things start to unravel on you, and can you stay calm and steady? I think Mac Jones did a pretty good job of that when he was here, and I think that's not the worst comparison in terms of playing style. We'll see. I mean, it's a big game for Ty, like I've said, but if they can get the running game going, I think they'll be thrilled about that. It gives them some ability to run the play action off that, and that's another big part of their offense. But if the game gets away from them, I think they're going to be throwing the ball. I don't think they're going to try to win this game, just running up the middle. It's just identically, in terms of their identity, it's not what they want to do.
A lot of the takeaways from that Florida State game, a lot of focus was on Alabama's offensive line and some of the struggles protecting Ty Simpson, some of the issues as that game wore on. Mike, how much of that do you feel like was a bad outing, just a poor performance on the road? And how much of that is a real concern for Alabama going into this game?
I think it's a real concern. I think you feel good about the center in Parker Brailsford, who's playing really well going back to last year. Probably going to be a day 2 NFL draft pick in the spring. The real enigma is Caden Proctor at left tackle, who physically is everything you want out of a left tackle. He's a top 5, overall recruit back in the day. He's played a lot of football now. It's his third year. He's been a starter the whole time, but he's just so inconsistent. And there's games where he gives up a lot of pressures. The Florida State game was one of those. And there's other games where he looks dominant, and you just don't know what you're going to get week in and week out with him. So that, until that's more level, consistent play from him, I think you do have to be concerned. But this is a line that's also missing Tyler Booker, who was arguably their best player last year. I mean, he got drafted, 12th overall by the Cowboys. So You don't really have that, and he was emotionally like a big leader of this team too. That's a big loss, and you don't have that mauler at left guard like they did these last couple years. And Booker was a man on fire in that SEC championship game a couple years ago. You have Cam Dewberry, who's a pretty big guy himself. He's a Texas A&M transfer, but that's still a step down from Tyler Booker. And then, like I said, the right side, they're trying to figure that out, and they're still going to rotate. Right tackle is Wilkin Formby, who's a little bit more experienced, but they have a freshman in Michael Carroll, who's a five-star prospect who's been seeing some more playing time. His ceiling's obviously a lot higher than Formby, but do you trust him in a road environment like this? And then at right guard, Jaden Roberts, a lot of people had him like as a All-American going into this year. He had a concussion in fall camp and was really locked in the competition. And he has not started yet this year. He's been coming off the bench. And that's Gino Vandemark, who's been starting at right guard, who's a little bit more undersized, but he has a long history with Chris Kapilovic, the offensive line coach, going back to Michigan State. So there's rotation between those four guys. I think their higher ceiling combination is Roberts and Carroll, but I think the combination that they trust more on the road, and I think we'll see start, is Vandemark and Formby at right guard and right tackle.
Yeah, Georgia's kind of going through its own situation on the offensive line. This is a little bit more due to injury, but as we record this on Thursday afternoon, I think what we're going to see from Georgia is Dontrell Glover, who's a true freshman at right guard, and that we will see Bo Hewley, who's a redshirt sophomore. I expect he will be the starting right tackle in this game. All right, Mike, flipping sides over to the defense. Describe what you've seen from this defense, what you feel like its greatest strengths are through 3 games, and who are a few of the defenders that Georgia fans should keep an eye on?
Yeah, I mean, this is a team that has been attacked mostly on the ground. Obviously, Florida State did that pretty well between Tommy Castellanos and their running backs, and a lot of the misdirection and the things that Gus Malzahn was doing. I think Castellanos only threw the ball 14 times in that game. And then overall, Alabama, I think it's averaging 16 pass attempts against them so far this year, which is by far the fewest of any team in the country. So their secondary has not really been tested. Wisconsin had a backup quarterback in there that looked pretty bad. ULM's quarterback is not good. So, Gunnar Stockton, in terms of his passing ability, is going to be probably testing the secondary a lot more than what they've seen so far. And, it's a good secondary. The corners are talented. We saw that last year. With Zabian Brown and Damani Jackson, they broke down a little bit in the second half, and then they made that play at the end with Zabian's interception. The safeties are experienced. Keon Sabb and Bray Hubbard back there, and Hubbard just had 2 picks against Wisconsin, and Deshaun Jones is their 5th DB who's out there a lot. He's a 5th-year guy as well. So really experienced. Secondary, I think they feel good about. It just hasn't been tested a whole lot this year. And then the front seven is probably the bigger question mark. It's experienced, but some of those guys just need to play better. I mean, Deontay Lawson coming back from a knee injury at linebacker did not look right against Florida State. Looked a step slow. I think just needs to let it loose mentally as well. Like some guys come back from an injury. It's just they need to kind of get back into the 100% mode. He's one of those guys. Justin Jefferson's a little bit undersized at linebacker. He got pushed around a little bit by Florida. We'll have to see if Georgia's able to do that. Jamarian Latham started at outside linebacker against Florida State, got hurt in that game, was supposed to come back for this game, and then he actually left practice Tuesday in an ambulance, and he's been in the hospital ever since with a neck injury. So he's out for this game, probably a while longer as well. So Quay Rusaw, who had that big play against Carson Beck last year, is probably going to start at Wolf, their outside linebacker position. But it's really the defensive line that is probably the biggest question mark of this defense. They've been missing Tim Keenan, who's their top defensive tackle for these first 3 games. He's going to be back for this game, but I would not expect him to play a full workload. I think if you can get 20 snaps out of him, you're going to be happy coming off of an ankle injury. So it's beyond that, it's been rough. They lost another defensive tackle in Jeremiah Beeman, who was out after week 1 with practice, an injury he had in practice there, and then Isaiah Fega has been a guy in there. London Simmons. Just like trying to think of some of these names. Like they're digging deep at defensive tackle. Kelby Collins, they got out of the portal from Florida. He's played a little bit. Like they're just trying to find anybody who can play defensive tackle. And that is number 1, I think, on the list of concerns for Alabama going into this game. You have James Smith, who I think you like at tackle, but if Georgia's able to run the ball on you, up the middle, like that just blows apart your defense. And that's a little bit what Florida State did. And there was that run at the end by Gavin Sawchuk that he just ran right through Alabama. And I think Keenan, a healthy, full 100% Keenan fixes that to a large extent, but that's not what you're going to get in this game. So that would be a concern. But again, I think they're stronger in the back end for Alabama than they are up front, and we'll just have to see how this line holds up.
Fascinated to see how Georgia tries to attack on offense, and two, if we see Gunnar Stockton run a little bit. He's got that ability now. He's not Tommy Castellanos, but he can make plays with his feet, so I do think that will be something to watch. Mike, I try to do a better job when we do these previews, especially in games that I think are going to be close, to bring up special teams. How shored up is Alabama's special teams? Is it a concern? Is it something that, Alabama feels good about if this is a close game, or something that might be a little shaky if this one's close?
Just one big question mark emoji right now. We don't know. It's a situation where, remember 2 years ago, Alabama had Will Reichard, who was their fifth-year kicker. He was the NCAA's all-time leading scorer, super reliable kicker. And then he graduated. Last year, they brought in a transfer in Graham Nicholson, who barely kicked. He had 14 kicks last year because Jalen Milroe was so good in the red zone that they almost never had to kick a field goal. So now he's gone, and you have Connor Talty as your field goal kicker, who's been behind Reichard and Nicholson the last couple of years. And a guy who, quite frankly, they didn't trust last year, which is why they went into the portal to find someone. And he missed a kick against Florida State. Granted, it was a 52-yarder, I think. But this is his first time on the road in the SEC kicking field goals. Nobody knows. And I think I even talked to him in August, and I said, like, how do you simulate what you're going to experience in some of these road environments? He's like, I can't. Like, there's no way of doing it. So you just simply don't know. And that is, I'm sure, in the back of the minds of some coaches, concerned, just because there's no track record there. And then the same thing, like your long snapper is brand new this year. They graduated their long snapper after 4 years, and they went into the portal, and they got him. So he's working with this group kind of as a new guy. He missed all the spring too with an injury. And then the punter, same thing, brand new. That you lost the punter in James Burnup, who had been here for 4 years and graduated, and they went into the D2 ranks to the Colorado School of Mines, and they got Blake Dowd out of the portal. So he's basically brand new as well. So you have a new kicker, at least in terms of starting. You have a new punter, new to the team, and a new long snapper, new to the team. And they've barely been used so far this year because against ULM and Wisconsin, Alabama almost never needed them. They weren't kicking field goals and they weren't punting. They went 21 straight drives without a punt between those two games. So we'll see. We'll see. I mean, there was a touchback from Dowd against Florida. He did punt against Florida State. He did punt a few times in that game. Talty had a field goal that he made, but the sample size is so small right now. And, it's an environment in Georgia in an SEC game on, everybody's watching on national TV that you just don't know how these guys are going to perform.
Yeah, it's something that I think is important if this game's close, because if you compare that to Georgia, Peyton Woodring's in his third year. Brett Thorson is coming off an injury, but he has played the last two games and looks to be, not maybe 100%, but back in the right direction. And then Bo Gardner's in his second season with the team, one of the nation's top long snappers. So I do think that is something that's going to matter if this thing is close on Saturday night. We're going to take a quick break and come back, and then we're going to talk about this matchup. We're going to talk about the conversation from the Alabama side this week, what Kalen DeBoer and the players have been talking about, the injuries of note, the latest that we have as we record this on Thursday, the matchups we want to pay attention to in this game, what needs to go right for Alabama to have a chance to win this game, and how we actually see this thing playing out. I'll throw this out there to the people who are watching this live. Throw in your score predictions in the comments, and we will read them as we also give ours. So we will take a quick break and be right back. right, Mike, this might not be the top 15, top 10 matchup that we're used to when Georgia and Alabama play, but this is still a very big deal. And, both coaches and both sets of players that have taught this week, I'm sure, have been excited about the matchup and anticipating another big game between the Bulldogs and the Crimson Tide. What sort of stood out to you about what Kalen DeBoer's had to say, what the players have been saying in the lead up to this game?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I was talking about earlier from DeBoer, where there's a different tone, a different energy. He's a coach that I think naturally wants to be very positive and wants to defend his players, wants to be uplifting. It's a different approach, obviously, from Nick Saban, and I think some players kind of it took some getting used to, and I don't know if any of them fully got used to that last year. And there's probably a realization, like I said, going into week one and seeing what happened against Florida State, that he had to change his approach. And so these last couple of weeks, it's been less of the kind of positivity and a little bit more of here's what we need to do and here's how we need to get better, and a little bit more muted, from DeBoer. So there hasn't been as much to kind of sink our teeth into from him, quote wise or anything, but he's been a little bit more focused, locked in terms of just talking to us. Like he's just going to get straight to the point and not really you go too much further than that. So, and Ryan Grubb, his offensive coordinator, I think has done that to an even larger extent. Some of his answers this week were about 7 words long. So it's just a very kind of, we're just focused on our team, like the outside noise we're blocking out. There's been a lot of that these past couple weeks after everything that happened in week one. And there's reports about the boosters, getting anxious at Alabama, and just a lot of things where I think Kalen DeBoer just said, I'm going to build a wall, and we're just moving forward with that. So that's kind of been the energy from them. I think players have fed off that as well. Like we're not listening to anybody outside the building. We're just locked in on what we need to do, one game at a time. That's been their message. And it's we'll see if they can perform better when things start going wrong. I think that is a point where Kane Womack has probably been the most effusive in terms of the speakers this week, their defensive coordinator. And he said playing better under adversity on the road is something this team needs to do better. Going back to last year, Oklahoma, they lost on the road. Tennessee, they lost on the road. Vanderbilt, they lost on the road. They lost in Tampa against Michigan in a bowl game, and then they lost against Florida State. So it's 5 out of the last 6 games away from Bryant-Denny Stadium this team has lost, which has not happened for this program in quite some time. So when things go wrong, is there that feeling of here we go again? That was something that DeBoer mentioned after the first game. Like they can't get in their own heads. They have to stay in the game. They have to continue to show fight. And they've pointed to Georgia as a good example of that. What's happened to Georgia, against Tennessee and being able to come back in that game. What happened to Georgia last year at Alabama? They all saw that firsthand. And I think Alabama wants their players to have that same sort of resiliency on the road in an environment where they know it's going to be tough.
Do you think that the road conversation about Alabama under Kalen DeBoer is it overblown, or do you think it is a legitimate thing that we have to pay attention to? The fact that this team has struggled. I think they're now 2-4 in true road games under DeBoer.
Yeah, no, it's definitely become a story. I think he doesn't want it to be in their heads, but at the same time, I think he realizes that that they probably need to look at all of their processes, I think is the word that he used, from everything from going to the hotel and getting ready for the game and all of these things that it takes to go on the road and see what they can do better. Again, intentionality is a word that's come up with DeBoer a lot. Being deliberate, moving with a purpose. These are all kind of phrases that he's used. So he's like, you walk into the hotel with a purpose. You walk into the stadium with a purpose. I think he mentioned color coding notes better, among players. So it's all these little things that he's trying to pick up on. If there's an area to improve any little area, like he's trying to do that. But again, I think it just comes back to the psyche of players, and when, especially players these days who I think are probably more affected by outside influences. That's something Nick Saban loves to talk about, is how much younger players now care about what other people think. And when things are not going well in the field, are you thinking about what other people are saying about you or what they're thinking about in the stands? Or are you able just to block it all out and continue to do your job on the field? I think that's probably the most important thing for this team to learn. I think Nick Saban did a very, very good job in his tenure of coaching players on how to do that. I don't think DeBoer has quite the same, obviously, the depth of experience that Nick Saban does as a head coach, and certainly not as a head coach in the SEC. So I think he's kind of learning as he goes in terms of how he needs to coach these players and what he needs to do better for a team on the road. But it's absolutely a trend. It's absolutely something that is being talked about, and it could rear its head again.
All right, as we record this, there has been one availability report for both teams as far as injuries. I'll mention just quickly for Georgia, tight end Ethan Barbour is out, offensive lineman center Malachi Tolliver is out, wide receiver Thomas Blackshear is out. None of those necessarily a surprise. Malachi Tolliver, I would say, is probably the most surprising, but he's been working as the third string center, so not a huge concern. The thing to watch on the Georgia side will be Ernest Green is listed as doubtful. I am not anticipating he'll be able to play, and as I mentioned earlier in this episode, watching for Bo Hewley to be the starting right tackle. A big deal for Georgia because Ernest has not been 100% the last few weeks. Struggled against Tennessee, wound up coming out before halftime. Right tackle will be a position to watch. Mike, what about the Alabama side? What is the latest on the injury front? And even as we get more availability reports these next few days, what will be the injury situations to kind of keep an eye on Saturday night?
And I'll just say with Green too, that's an area where Alabama absolutely needs to try to take advantage of. I just don't know. Like this is a team that their pass rush has not been great. This Alabama team since last year, their sack number is way down last year. Their sack they did not have a sack the first two games this year from the front seven, and they had a few against Wisconsin that was really struggling along the offensive line. But that's something where if Georgia's missing somebody along their offensive line, this Alabama team needs to take advantage of that, and their pass rush just needs to step up. So in terms of what Alabama has missing, well, one of their defensive linemen slash outside linebackers, Jamarian Latham, as I mentioned, who as of last night was still in the hospital with that neck injury. So, the other guy that's out is Beeman, Jeremiah Beeman, the defensive tackle. He's already been out for the year, so it's kind of known. Keenan is probable. Again, I don't expect him to play a full workload. And then Danny Lewis is another tight end who is probable for this game. He's missed the first three games. Probably a starter. He was never healthy in the spring. He wasn't healthy in fall camp. He isn't healthy now, so it's kind of hard to see where he fits into this 2025 team. But he was listed on the depth chart in week one as a starter. So if he's back, does that help Alabama? Maybe a little bit. They have been playing a freshman there, Caleb Edwards, who they really seem to like, and I think he will still play. So I don't know if that makes a whole lot of difference in this game, but the big one is getting Jam Miller back, and he's not on the injury report. So again, I think that's just one where you have to feel your way through the game, and if your collarbone is not feeling right, then I don't know if he'll play a ton after that. But if he's feeling good, then just keep rolling with him.
All right, look into this game, Mike, on Saturday. What does Alabama need to accomplish? What are the things they need to do, really, in any of the three phases, in order to have a chance of winning this one?
Yeah, I think it helps to run the ball better, but I don't know if they'll be able to do that. And if they do, will the game situation dictate? Like, I think it's going to have to be through the air for this Alabama team where they win the game, which would mean the receivers that I've talked about would mean Ty Simpson playing a really good game. And the best thing that Ty's done so far this year, despite his accuracy has been great, it's not turning the ball over. Zero turnovers for Ty, zero turnovers for this Alabama team as a whole, which I believe is one of single digits in the country at this point, teams that have done that. So that's obviously an important part. But defensively, getting a better pass rush, getting after Stockton is important. But I think it's also covering Georgia's backs and tight ends. I think I feel good about the matchups between Alabama's corners and Georgia's receivers. To me, it's can Deontay Lawson chase down a tight end or a back? And there's a lot of different guys that Georgia uses with kind of coming off his injury and not looking kind of what you want to see out of Deontay Lawson. Can he do that? Is one of the biggest questions for me in this game. So I think we did a VIP roundtable on our site today, and me and Alex Scarborough, the other writer, both picked the same thing on defense. It was, can Deontay Lawson cover a running back? Because that's going to be a big part of this game. I think that They know Georgia's going to want to throw the ball out in space. Alabama did not tackle well against Florida State, even these last couple games, even though the scores look great. They've had a lot of missed tackles and missed assignments on defense that Kane Womack has said if we keep putting that on tape, teams are going to exploit that. So cleaning a lot of that up is really a key part of this game.
To your point, I'm really watching Zach Branch, especially early in this game. He's hit some screens, and like you said, especially that Florida State game, kind of suspect tackling out on the perimeter. Alabama has to play better on that in that area in this game. Before we get into our predictions, Mike, I did want to ask you this, and I probably should have asked it a little bit earlier, but you look at this series, Georgia Alabama, and I've had a lot of people ask me about it this week. What does this mean for the Georgia side, for the Georgia fan base? And I said, it's a big deal. And a lot of the reason it's been a big deal is because Georgia struggled in this series. Kirby Smart is now 1-6 against Alabama. And a lot of those games won had very high stakes. I mean, you talk about meeting in two different national championships, multiple SEC championship games as well. But also, a lot of the time, they've been pretty close. Now, there have been a few blowouts on Alabama's side along the way. But what does this, I guess you can call it a rivalry. I can't figure out what exactly, this series, what it means for the Alabama side, and probably more so the fan base than it does the actual team.
Yeah, obviously Alabama fans like to kind of, I don't say downplay, but they don't like to call it a rivalry because it almost gives credence to Georgia too much in their minds. And they feel like they've had the better hand of Georgia, pretty well. And obviously they see Tennessee and Auburn as more their traditional rivals. The same conversation just happened with LSU, because LSU was not a permanent rival on Alabama's schedule for the next 4 years. And people are like, well, LSU's not a rival. We just played a lot of big games against them. Same thing with Georgia. I think they're not a rival, but Alabama fans know that they've played a lot of big games. So, look, I don't think this game is the end-all, be-all for Alabama this season. Obviously, they're underdogs. Like, they're expected to lose this game. So if you win it, then you just got a top-5 win on the road. And I think a lot of people would feel great about that. But they also beat Georgia last year and became the number 1 team in the country. And the very next week, they went out and they lost to Vandy. And then they lost to Tennessee. And then they lost to Oklahoma. So either way, it's not the end of the season. It's not you win the game and you're going to the SEC championship game. No, that's probably not the case because look what happened last year. You lose the game, you're out of the playoffs. No, I don't think that's the case either. I think you can still win a lot of the games you have left on your schedule. So it's a big game, but it's not monumental in their eyes. I think they like the idea of continuing to have Georgia's number, but they know this is not 2015 all over again. Like this is an Alabama team that has more holes and more flaws. So, we'll see how it all matches up. I think Georgia obviously matches up pretty well against Alabama talent-wise. They always have. It could just be that Alabama plays really hard. There's no questions about effort. There's no questions about, loafing as there were in the first game. And it's just Georgia just beats you. Like, that's entirely possible in this game. So, I think people get that. But, there's still, you want to go out and beat Georgia. You want to go on the road and, quiet the crowd and make people leave early. Like, there's all that. It's just, I don't think this is a game where if Alabama loses, unless it's just a complete shutdown blowout game where people are like, fire Kalen DeBoer or any of that. Like, I just don't know if that's the right game to have that reaction. So it might still happen, but if it's a close game and you lose to Georgia, I think Kalen DeBoer is fine. And I don't think there needs to be talk about firing him next week.
All right, let's get to the moment everybody's waiting for, Mike. How does this one play out? And if you want to give a score prediction, go right ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I predicted that Georgia would win last year, and I was wrong. And so I'm going to do it again. I predicted Georgia will win this game as well for our website today. 33 to 28 was my score prediction. It goes back to what I was just saying, that I don't know if it's always just about effort. And again, I think people focus too much on that, on the Florida State game, that it was Alabama's clearly the better team than Florida State. The only way they could have lost was by not trying hard. Well, I think Alabama has flaws too. And I think even last year we saw those exposed when they played Tennessee. Alabama played hard that Tennessee game last year in Knoxville. It was just tough to beat a team like that on the road in the SEC. And I think the same thing could hold true in this one. Like, Alabama's good. They're, in terms of college football as a whole, they're great. But are they elite? No. And it's if you're not going to be that sort of team, that it sometimes is really tough to win a game like this. And you can go out there, you can try hard, you can do all the right things, you can not turn the ball over, you can make every play, and you lose. And sometimes that happens. So I can see that being the case here. But it's still one of those where you could play the game again in December in the playoffs or SEC championship, whatever it may be, and it could go a different direction. So I predict that Georgia will win, but again, I don't know if that means everything in the grand scheme of things. I could pick Alabama to win if they played again this year.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a game that comes down to the wire. For me, I'll shout out Patrick Brown from Go Vols 24/7. We did this podcast for the Tennessee game. He said picking Tennessee to beat Georgia at this point is kind of like Lucy and Charlie Brown with the football. It's like you just kind of have to see it. And that was how I felt going into this game, picking Georgia. But I'm going to pick Georgia. I'm going to pick Georgia 27-23. I think it's a one-possession game. I think it's a tight game. The main reason I'm picking Georgia, I just think Alabama's offensive line is suspect. And I think that combined with the questions in the run game and then the questions on tackling, I totally agree with Mike that I don't think you're going to see, the Alabama defense just watching guys go by and the lack of effort that you saw at times in that Florida State game. I think it's going to be a very competitive game. To me, the key for Georgia, they have to pressure Ty Simpson. I wrote a story with this stat from Pro Football Focus earlier in the week, but Florida State was so good at pressuring Ty Simpson and getting to him. I think he was 3 of 14 when pressured in that game. The question is, can Georgia do it? Because Georgia's pass rush, especially these last 2 years, has not really stood out, and it's not a pass rush, especially that racks up a lot of sacks. But they've got to hit Ty Simpson. If they've got to incorporate blitzes, if they've got to, work and get the second level or even guys in the secondary in there to affect him, I think it's going to go a long way in this game. And it's cliche, but I watched the lines of scrimmage. I mean, I think that will go a long way in determining this game. But I just like where Georgia is on that front. And I think that they win this one 27-23. And I think, Mike, that we're going to be in for a long Saturday night. I think this one is going to come down to the wire no matter which team wins it.
Yeah, hopefully it's not as long as that Georgia Tech game last year. I'm trying to get some sleep Saturday night, but yeah, it's gonna be a good game. And like you said, Alabama, I think, has the upper hand with their receivers. I think that's their path to victory is using what they used last year. Ryan Williams is better than anybody on Georgia's secondary. Like, just throw the ball to him. Like, have him beat guys. That's their path. But I can also see their defensive line, their offensive line, those parts of Alabama just not holding up against a very physical, very talented Georgia team. So that's, I think, Georgia's path to victory is being able to run the ball on Alabama and being able to get to Ty Simpson as well. And it's a huge game for Ty. And he's experienced in the sense that he's a fourth-year player, but this is still brand new to him, being out there in the spotlight, on the road in the SEC. This is the first time he's done it. So we'll just have to see how he responds to that situation.
Share some of the scores from Dawgs 24/7. So I have Georgia 27-23. Ben Wolk is picking Alabama 24-17. Olivia Sayer is picking Alabama 34-27. And Kip Adams, the only other Georgia pick, he's got Georgia 31-21. And I want to shout out on Facebook, Mike Lowry says 31-21 Georgia. A couple of double-digit scores there, but I think most folks are expecting a close game. Mike, I want to say thank you for popping on and sharing some time with us during a busy week. Also, we were dealing with some technical difficulty to start, so I appreciate you being patient there. But I do want to give you an opportunity to plug what you guys have going on at Bama 247. Some of the stuff you guys are working on, what folks can keep an eye out for the rest of the week as we get ready for Saturday night.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier in the show, we have our roundtable with Alex Scarborough and Brett Greenberg from our site, and a lot of analysis in there as far as this game goes. And for people who want to read more of you, we'll actually have that tomorrow on our site. Our 5 questions with you will be up tomorrow. And then the other coach at Alabama, Nick Saban, is also has a weekly spot on the Pat McAfee show on Fridays. So he's usually quoted just as much on our site as Kalen Bohr is, and we'll have to see what Nick Saban says tomorrow. And then he's actually speaking in Birmingham on Monday at the same time that Kalen DeBoer is speaking in Tuscaloosa, and so I'll be at one of those, and Alex Scarborough will be at the other. It's like we cover two different head coaches here, but that's what happens when Nick Saban retires and goes into media.
Again, thanks to Mike for popping on for the podcast. Thanks everyone who watched this live, everyone who is watching or listening to it after the fact. Go subscribe to Dawgs 24/7. Go subscribe to Bama 24/7. Great content. And again, these are the games we get into this for. This is going to be a fun one. We're excited to get this thing rolling. Again, go check out Dawgs 24/7. Bama 24/7 on the Georgia side. Go check out our YouTube, Dawgs 24/7, our TikTok. Go subscribe to the Junkyard Dawgcast wherever you get your podcast. Please rate and review. It helps us out a ton. And let's get ready. The countdown is on to Saturday night. Super excited to see what the atmosphere is like between the hedges. We are in for another very entertaining game. I have no doubt about that. So we will end the episode right there. For Mike Rodak, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.